Hello, this is Hilary Robertson. Welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. In this episode, I'm joined by Grammy-nominated violinist Curtis Stewart. Curtis has a stunning album that's out now. It's called Of Power, and it's inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement. It features violin, voice and electronics, with 5 tracks mastered by Prince's sound engineer Derek Lindsay from Paisley Park. The album was created entirely during the COVID-19 lockdown, and it's comprised of original compositions and reimagined works by, this is an amazing list, Charlie Parker, Johann Sebastian Bach, Coleridge Taylor Perkinson, Childish Gambino, John Coltrane, Paganini, Electra Curtis, Issei and Stevie Wonder. The album is described as capturing the shock, fear, sorrow and outrage following George Floyd's death, and feelings that Curtis bottled up over months of isolation, juxtaposed with moments of lyrical beauty, such as his solo take on Stevie Wonder's Isn't She Lovely? This is a fascinating album, and I hope you enjoyed listening to Stay Woke. Now it's time to listen to my conversation with Curtis. Welcome to Harmonious World. It's really nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Happy to be here. Yes.
Great. I want to talk to you about Of Power. It's an incredible album.
Oh, thank you.
You must be really proud of it.
I am very, it's like a coming out party in a certain type of way. Most of my work has been with my string quartet, public quartet, and I 6 years ago I came out with an album called Of Colors, which was with a whole jazz band, and I was exploring classical music and the idea of color and the psychology and social implications of color. But this is really, it's all me. Everything on there is just me. It's solo violin. I did all the electronics. I did all the arranging. I composed several of the pieces. I did all the writing. And I worked up the guts to actually use my voice. So I'm speaking a lot of stuff, and I'm singing, and I guess speaking verse. I mean, some people might hear it and think it was rapping. I'm not sure if it is rapping. I haven't spent enough time. I've realized how difficult saying words in time is. So I don't want to call it rapping. So I don't think I'm there yet. But it's something like that.
Yeah, but it's your voice and the violin and obviously all the electronics and everything else. What I find really interesting about this album is that I love the concept behind it. The fact that it's a response to what happened in 2020 and, obviously COVID and the lockdown and what that meant for you personally, but then also the bigger stuff, about Black Lives Matter and everything. And so I love the concept, but then I also love the music and I love what you did with that. So it's great.
Cool. I'm glad it's hitting you on all those levels. Conceptually, it's just the creation of the album was a result of quarantine. I mean, I had, I couldn't sleep. I'm a caretaker for my mom. So while everything was locked down, the trains weren't running. I was too afraid to take cars. I would bike from my home in Inwood, down about 5 or 6 miles every night, back and forth, to take care of her at night. And when I was there, we've got her set up because she has a medical condition, so there's all these little bleeps and blops, and I just couldn't sleep. So I was just creating a lot of music, and I was writing a lot just to kind of air it out. And I decided to make stuff, and I figured it was a moment when we were all down. So nobody's going to kick me while we're all down here. So I figured I would just put things out and take a risk and use my voice and use my words to talk about those pains and those worries. And it all just happened to be about the same thing over and over again. So I put in a certain type of order to tell a certain story.
Yes. Yeah. And you finish with your beautiful version of Isn't She Lovely?
Oh, thank you.
Is that your mother? Is that your partner? Is that who is
I like to think of she throughout the whole album. I'm actually speaking to someone. I think I do eventually. I accidentally said mom at one point in those little confessional moments. So I
Yeah.
guess the she is my mom. But I would like to think of she as being like a more metaphor. It could I like to think that to allow the listener to wonder who or what the she is for them,
Yeah.
in terms of speaking, because a lot of times I'm speaking to that person and saying, confessing, like, all this stuff is happening, I don't know what to do, all this stuff is happening, I'm just trying to take care of this. It's like a kind of confessional, um, and like taking care of that person could be taking care of, yeah, a partner, or in this case specifically it was my mom, but also taking care of the people in our world that we need to
Right.
take care of. There's also one song that is a direct homage to Breonna Taylor.
I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the music is based on one of the slow movements from the Bach solo sonata, and I added some electronics that kind of create like a horror movie version of that piece, where you kind of hear like these really punchy snare drums that kind of emulate potential, knocks on the door. Or I was kind of imagining, like, in Shostakovich eight string quartet, there's chung 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 chung, and that's supposed to be the knock on the door in Germany. And I was just kind of imagining what it might be. Actually, that song is from the perspective of Kevon Walker. I was imagining being her partner and what that
Yeah.
must have been like when you're somebody's knocking on the door and you're just trying to protect the people around you. Um, and the Anyway, it's too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah, and I
yeah,
think isn't that what this is about as well? This is about the she, but it's also about the people around the significant character. Because I heard George Floyd's brother interviewed after the court case, and or that bit of the court case, and he was such a intelligent, articulate young man, and he came across so well, and I thought this is as much about him having an opportunity to talk about what it's like for the survivors.
yeah, really, truly. I mean, yeah. I was. I just watched this movie about Schmidt. You ever see that movie?
No.
It's like one of the last movies where Jack Nicholson actually is acting in like a serious kind of way.
Right.
Um, and it was about he just retired. He retires and his wife passes away immediately after he retires,
Oh,
and it's about him dealing with that grief.
yeah.
And I was just thinking about how that sadness that and he with everyone for everyone around him, he's supposed to be putting on this like amazing character of kind of like grace and perseverance, and it's so hard to really talk about grief,
Yeah.
and to let it be vented out. I was actually also just watching the recent Bo Burnham Netflix special where he's like locked inside of a house, and he's just really he's very vulnerable, and he admits that he's like not where he is in his life. And I think it's so important for artists to kind of air that out and be heard in this kind of peaceful platform of music and art where, people get to judge it. When you go to a concert, you're allowed to judge what you're hearing, and it's very much important for it must be. I can't imagine what it's like for people actual survivors of any sort,
Yeah.
because their words are treated as if they were great orators or elected officials, when they're just people that something horrible happened to them,
Right.
and suddenly we are judging their character. We are judging how well they came off. We are judging. I'm not to put anything on you, but like it's like suddenly they're on this platform and they're supposed to perform.
Yeah,
People
but
have been
why should
studying.
they?
Yeah, right. People have been studying their whole lives to be performers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm just now becoming comfortable, and so uh, it's it's so important for them to be heard, and so just the sense of grief and just sitting in loss for a second, just to appreciate, even if you disagree with the um, the policies that those people are then proposing to try
Yeah.
to prevent that tragedy from happening again, just to sit with the loss, you know. There was so much in the States. There was so much. Obviously, everything gets politicized, and everything's like, you know, battling right versus left. And so, like, when the protests were happening, there were so many peaceful protests. I mean, even in my neighborhood, we just walked around. There was a huge thing of like maybe 100, 300 people, very well distanced, and we just walked around our neighborhood and, you know, in protest, and it was very peaceful. You know, the whole neighborhood kind of clapped as we walked down their street.
Yeah.
You know, and there were so many of those, but what made it to the news is obviously violence. Like, violence is the only thing that seems to sell, and so
Yeah.
that's what makes it to the news, and those are the stories that get told. Um, anyway, yes,
Yeah,
I
and
think
we
it's
and
so
we
important.
yeah, and we should listen to the voices of the people who just talk and just express themselves. And because sometimes the need to talk is balanced by the importance of listening,
Right,
you know.
exactly, very much so.
Yeah. So, the concept behind the album and how it came about is fascinating. But talk to me a bit about your background. You have studied your craft, haven't you?
Yeah, sure, yes. Well, both my parents are musicians. My dad is a jazz tuba player. His name's Bob Stewart. He's like played in like with Dizzy Gillespie and Sonny Rollins and Chick Corea, like all the people, and toured the world. And he's really known for being able to play bass lines on the tuba. So he's been, you know, the tuba was originally one of the original jazz instruments, but then as the music started getting faster and the music started being playing for longer amounts of time, it kind of phased out. But he's kind of been able to develop techniques where he can play just like a bass, but then like a walk upright bass, but then
Right.
also, and then my mom is from Europe, um, and she studied with Greek. She's Greek, but she lived in Poland, and she studied with like the in the Warsaw Opera, and then she went to study at the Sibelius Academy. But she was also hanging out with all these like Greek gypsies in Poland, and so she would write a lot of music. Then she came to the States after I was born, and so she was developing like jazz with Greek music with she studied with Simone Shaheen and did all this stuff with Middle Eastern music. So all of that stuff was happening in my world, and they would all have rehearsals in our living rooms, and you know, I was just hanging out with these crazy jazz and classical musicians all the time. And I always just kind of wanted to, and whenever they were on stage, I just kind of wanted to be like them. So I eventually ended up playing in some of their bands, and that was kind of like my come up in terms of learning how to lead a band, and learning what I really loved. Like, I always loved their music, but what I really wanted to do, and versus like, you know what, I don't need to do that part of what they're up to,
Yeah.
and then I went to school at the Eastman School of Music, and then I got I got a math degree at the University of Rochester, and then I got a teaching degree back in New York, and so I started teaching at the LaGuardia Performing Arts High School. It's the Fame School, if you
Yeah.
watch that movie.
Yeah.
And now I teach and work at the Juilliard School. I teach chamber music, and I teach a class called Cultural Equity and Performance Practice, which is essentially the performance practice of Black American art music with a focus on the blues. But yeah, I've taken jazz lessons with like Christian Howes and John Blake and Diane Monroe, from the Uptown String Quartet. She's an amazing mentor of mine, and
Wow.
yeah, you've been doing it for a while. I've been in New York for the last. Well, I grew up in New York, but I've been working in New York for the last 10 or 12 years. So I've just been hustling.
Yeah.
Um, this week, actually, I'm doing a concert. My quartet is going to Utah from New York, so I'm
Wow,
taking
that's a
my
long
first.
way.
Yeah, I'm taking my first plane flight. I have to get up at 4 a.m. I haven't gotten up that early unless I was freaking out. And then straight from there, I'm flying to South Carolina to do a concert with Alicia Hall Moran and Jason Moran for the Spoleto Festival. There's a performance that they're doing that premiered at Carnegie Hall, and then it went down to the Kennedy Center, and then they did stuff all around the world. And it's called Two Wings, which it kind of documents the effect of the great migration of Black Americans from the South to the North, and the music and culture that they brought, and how that shaped music in the United States.
that sounds like an interesting few days.
Yeah, it'll be hectic. I hope I make it. I used to have all kinds of like, chops. You have to develop like chops for traveling.
Yeah, exactly.
You get off the plane, you hit
Yeah,
the thing, make sure you get a nap, you drink a lot of water.
yeah.
Um,
And then now we've all forgotten that because it's
yeah,
been 18 months or something of nothing.
that's right. So hopefully
Yeah.
I get my chops together before. Mhm.
Well, usually I ask people how lockdown has been for them, but I know how lockdown has been for you because it's all in this album.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, there's, it is a framed. I'm mostly focusing on the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Um, there's been some great moments. I ended up doing some performances for the Mostly Mozart Festival, and then doing some work with the New York Philharmonic. And I would never have dreamed that those things would have happened. And so it's funny, like professionally for me, things are going quite well, and things are happening because I'm just kind of chugging along
Yeah.
and finally putting myself out there. But yeah, personally, things are as good as they can be. I mean, my mom has been dealing with she has brain cancer. She's been dealing with this for like the last 4 years. She's
Wow.
like, I mean, and it's hard, but it's almost the best case scenario. She had the same thing that Senator John McCain had,
Oh, yeah.
and I'm imagining, and they got it around the same time. So when he passed away, I was like, oh God, like that was 2 years ago.
Right.
And so I'm just imagining, he must have had the best, medical access to all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I do feel, I'm not a very religious person. I don't know if I'm spiritual or anything, but I do feel lucky. I feel very blessed
Right.
to just be able to spend this time with my mom, and I'm trying to just be very grateful for the time I get to just be with her and
Yeah.
to take care of her. It's like I don't have children. I've never had a pet, and so I get to really experience what it's like to really take care of somebody, the ups and downs. Yeah, it's been hard, but it's been hard for everybody. We're all
Well,
going through our own story.
yeah. Yeah. I'm interested in you as an educator.
Mm,
So you teach at Juilliard,
that's right.
and what are the best bits of teaching at Juilliard?
Well, I just started this. This last semester was my first semester teaching there. The best bits are just like they are so sharp and so they're right there and responsive, and we're making music, and they're challenging me, but we're also collaborating quite. It feels like more of a collaboration, and I get to kind of ask them questions and get them to pull out and really hone the stories that they are aiming to tell.
Yeah.
So that's super fun. When I was teaching at LaGuardia, the high school, I mean, the best bits were just those moments in the room where everybody was just suddenly on the same page, and we just kind of something changes. It's funny, my student. When I remember when I told them I was leaving, the high school kids. First of all, they all screamed at me. They were like, "No!" There was really one girl got on a chair and screamed at me, and she's like, "You cannot leave!" And that previous Christmas, I was notorious for like attendance. So if someone was late or something, I'd be like -5. I would just be very nonchalant and unemotional about it. Some teachers are like, "Why are you late?" They try to get students to do what they want by yelling at them. I was just like, you know what? You can take account. This is going to be your, you
Yeah.
know. And so they got me a sweater like, "You're late" on the front, like -5, and I wore it all the time. It was great.
Oh, that's
Made
amazing.
my job easier.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I still keep in touch with them, and I mean, just seeing them. The best bits are like seeing them really create something. There was a moment in the class in the Juilliard class, where I was very focused on making sure that we highlight the music of black composers. I feel like I have something to give them in terms of that, and I feel like that's something that needs to be a hole that needs to be filled in classical music in general. And we were discussing in class, and one student was saying, because we've been talking about all these techniques of playing the blues, and one student's from China, and they brought in a traditional Chinese folk song, and he said, "Oh, I've been really, exploring all these techniques that we've been talking about for the blues in this Chinese folk music, and I've never played this music before. I've never played this music for my culture, and it's amazing that it's a class at Juilliard. Like I never would have imagined that I would be learning about, getting to my own culture through this class." And so at that moment, we had a whole discussion, and I told them I was able to share my thought process where it's like, I want this class to be about this. You brought this in, and I'm saying that's amazing. Then my second thought is, well, what about this other standard and then from there we actually started to co-create what the class needs to be about. So instead of it being about only black composers, it's we restructured the whole class in the classroom together to try to figure out a way for them to connect one composition from a composer of color with a piece from their own background if they like. And so students started arranging solo violin pieces of like Korean folk songs, and one person brought in a Michael Jackson song that was really like her and her sister used to listen to when she was a little kid, and so we start to co-create, and that is really what,
Yeah.
that moment I was like, this is what I want to be doing.
Right.
It's really hard to make that happen all the time.
Sure. Yeah. One of the things I particularly like about Of Power is the Charlie Parker and John Coltrane, well, and the Stevie stuff as well. I love those Stevie tracks, but particularly the Charlie Parker and the John Coltrane tracks, because they, to me, if they weren't black, I think they would have been better respected as musicians for what I'm not sure that's actually true, but they don't have the respect as composers of music.
Right.
I mean, they both Parker and Coltrane, it was all their own stuff.
Right.
Whoever they were playing with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely genius. Geniuses. For me, especially Charlie Parker, I don't know what it is, like the creation of bebop.
Yeah.
Language. I mean, Charlie Parker didn't create bebop, but he's kind of like, I see him as like the Mozart of that. Like Mozart didn't create the classical style, but he's like what we consider the pinnacle. Like he embodies all the things.
Yeah.
And I think Charlie Parker is just like everything is so intricate. The swing is in there. He's interacting with like all the instruments at the same time, creating these really harmonically and melodically complex lines, but it's also very songful, song-like, however you want to say it.
Yeah.
It's just amazing, and the tunes are these little gems. I almost imagine like Webern wrote these like tiny little pieces that are like these perfect little intervallic studies in a certain type of way, and I almost imagine Charlie Parker tunes to be like that. They're so like intervallically, they're all really just kind of locked in to itself. And that's kind of what I was imagining with that song Scrapple, except I essentially used the electronics kind of map with the melody. So the drum hits all kind of like pop and hit with the melody notes. So I was trying to imagine what it might be like for a producer. That was when I was first starting to create electronic music, and how the melody and harmony interacts with these electronic sounds. And then the middle section of Scrapple is just a total fantasy. It's not really, it has nothing to do with that. That's why it's called Scrapple and not Scrapple from the Apple.
Yeah.
And then the John Coltrane tune is so gorgeous. After the Rain is just it's one of those songs I can listen to on repeat just forever. It's just so beautiful. It's something about the simplicity of the melody and the harmony. And then that was actually maybe, that might have been the first song I recorded on the album.
Oh.
And so I was just in my house and I was just layering violin stuff. And my partner and I decided to create a project where she would create art in reaction to the sounds, and then we went back and forth. And there's this whole thing about the home in the video that I created for. There's a whole thing with like a home and there's a picture of our living room that she turned into art, and it kind of evolves. It was at the very beginning of quarantine. So yeah, that was a very like way of kind of just relaxing when just everything is just like it's like hard to remember how unbearably scary that period was.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think at
Um,
the beginning it really was, wasn't it?
it was just like like shaking. I just felt like my whole body was shaking all the time. I didn't, and we're
Yeah.
in our homes, don't know what to do. I've never been in my house this long in my life.
Yeah.
I put up lights. I put up pictures.
Yeah.
My house used to be a cave. Now it's nice.
Yeah. Oh no, it's crazy, isn't it?
Um, yeah, and then those Stevie tunes, I've always just he's like just so songful. Everything, the melodies are so simple, but the harmonies are just so rich, and it actually gives a lot of not a lot of room from a violin standpoint to just really to be able to articulate those harmonies in many ways. And so I just decided I was like, well, we're allowed to, create violin little, encore pieces based on like operas and, like Chrysler used to pretend he was someone else and then wrote it in the style of that person. So why can't we write encore pieces in the style of Stevie Wonder or John Coltrane or like why is that? And it's interesting what happens from an industry point of view. Like the second I say John Coltrane or
Yeah.
suddenly this is not a classical album.
Right.
Like even if I remove let's say I remove the electronics because let's say that's a problematic thing even though I can list at least five albums that have that and are still solidly considered classical. Even if I remove the improvisation, which the Stevie Wonder tunes are not improvised, they're totally through composed.
Yeah.
It's just interesting. You say these names, you just know their background, and then all these assumptions come, and then also they're considered over here, and
Right.
so people are, you know, but
Yeah.
it's just the way I've been dealing with that from the
Right.
beginning. I feel like that'll be the that'll be the little conflict for the rest of my career.
Yeah. Because actually I was thinking this would be a shoe-in for a Grammy nomination, this album. But
But
which
like
category would
which
you put it?
category? Right.
And that's the issue, isn't it?
Mhm.
And the more I've been doing this, I mean, I started Harmonious World just over a year ago, and I had no preconceptions. I didn't know whether I would do three and then that would be it, or
Hmm.
whatever. But the thing that I have learned more than anything is how much richness there is in terms of music that you can't put into a genre, and so many albums do this thing where they might fit somewhere and then you suddenly think, yeah, but that's a bit, whatever. And
Right.
this is a prime example of that. And I wonder how long it will be before the Grammys have to turn around and go, do you know what, it's not about putting things in boxes, it's
Right.
about what is quality. The reason my podcast is called Harmonious World is because it comes from a Quincy Jones quote
Oh.
about imagine what a harmonious world it would be if everyone shared a little of what they're good at.
Mm.
And the other thing that Quincy Jones always says, and I don't think he originated it, but is there are only two types of music, good music and bad music.
Right. Totally. To you. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And because some people
yeah,
sometimes I just love listening to really bad 80s pop music. I don't know what it is. It's something about that gated snare drum. I'm just like, yeah. It reminds me of, like this what is it called? This Christmas? No, that's
Last Christmas,
Last Christmas.
Wham.
Yeah, like that. Right. Yeah. I'm like I like that song. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that's like, but who cares about good and bad? It's just like the music that hits you. That's how I see it.
And it
Um,
hits you differently at different times as well. I
right.
think there's
Although, there was a moment when I was creating, I could have this album probably could be two or three albums. And the label that I was talking to, we had this conversation where it's like, well, I could split up all the electronic tracks and just put them in one album.
right.
Or I could split up there's enough solo violin tracks where I could just make that an album. Or, I could put all the Black Lives Matter stuff in one place and that could be an album. or I could put all the jazz stuff in one place, and that could be, it could have been maybe it itself. There would be repeats, but it could be like 3 or 4 different albums.
Right.
And for me, it didn't really capture the real story.
No.
Did you? I don't know if you watched that Hannah Gadsby special. I keep referencing Netflix specials. I don't know why, but anyway, there's one point when she's telling all these jokes. She's hilarious. She's brilliant. And then at one point, she just decides, I'm going to quit comedy and I'm going to actually tell you the stories behind all of those jokes I just told, and the amount of actual trauma and hurt and pain that the stories have, and how I've chopped these stories up to become funny. And I mean, I could have done that with this album quite a bit, but I just decided that this was my whole story. And hopefully I don't pay the price for it, but we'll we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's a great album. So, and what I say matters,
Yes, it does. It matters to me.
Yeah,
I've just met you. It matters to me.
Good. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and I'm so happy to talk to you, and I hope everything I'm glad you continued your podcast for a whole year.
I know.
Amazing. Keep going.
Thank you.
Yes. Good to speak to you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Harmonious World. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as I did. You can find links to Curtis and to my social media in the show notes. And there's also a link to his website, so you can find all of the tracks on the album. Go and buy them, get them on Bandcamp. Enjoy this album. This is a great one. And I think it's my tip for a Grammy nomination. Thank you for joining me once more for Harmonious World. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.